Over time, we we learn many patterns. I would say we're a collection of patterns on top of patterns on top of patterns, and a big nested web of impulses and beliefs. And I know one of my patterns um, that I picked up probably in school as a kid was that if I was asked to do something by someone else, especially a teacher, and even more especially a teacher that I wasn't fond of, I would have an inherent resistance to it. Part of me would rebel. And like any pattern, at least my belief is there are good things about it, and there are things that are not as good about it. So each pattern has benefits and challenges or deficits. So this at times made me a good rebel, and taught me the ability to say no sometimes. But on the downside, very often a teacher might be recommending something that would be beneficial to me, and um, even if I could see it, it was like there was this internal desire to say no or to reject it simply because it had been tasked to me in some way. So it's always interesting to notice these different patterns and then discover if there are other alternatives that you can use. For me, if I was asked by a teacher that I liked, then it was like it went right in, and even if it wasn't a great idea. But what I don't like about this pattern is it wasn't letting me evaluate just for myself how I felt about what I was being tasked to do or being taught. I was unconsciously coloring the experience just because of this pattern. And years ago, I was hanging out with a buddy, and he's an amazing learner. And I was doing a little casual modeling of him about how he learns. And he said something that caught my attention. He said, well, the first thing I do is when somebody offers me a particular topic or technique or equation or whatever it is, concept, he said, the first thing that I do is I make it my own. And he said this a number of times, and I thought that was really interesting. And I could imagine what he meant, but I asked him, I said, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by making it your own? And he said, well, this teacher may be asking me to do it. He said, but as soon as they utter the words, he said, I relate to it directly as if I invented it, or something to that extent. He said he would try to understand it and begin to imagine how he would use it. So even if it was coming from someone else, he immediately personalized it and said, it no longer has anything to do with them. It just has to do with my relationship to this particular topic. And I found this very, very useful, because then I could sort of strip away the relationship to whoever the authority was that I might have some resistance to. And I could start to really see how I felt about something and how useful I might find it. It allowed me to begin to imagine personalizing it so that I could really find the nuances and how I would use it, how I felt about it. So it's really, really powerful experience. Now, what I will say is, the type of patterns that I'm talking about, this just being one example, is not something that I unlearn immediately. That pattern is still alive and well. Like somebody could say, here's a free car. And if it was the wrong person, part of me would unconsciously get skeptical immediately. I would start looking for what's wrong with this situation. This new pattern that my friend offered me allowed me a new way of orienting to things. Now, what I do to begin the process of internalizing, my friend's pattern, was I don't try to obliterate the old one. I use it as a trigger. So the moment that I notice myself resisting something, I pause and I start to ask myself, well, what would this be like if it was my own? Or sometimes I'll do a little trick. I'll imagine somebody that I respect also recommending it to me. So it's like somebody you don't respect recommends a book, and somebody you do respect recommends a book. And that at least, freed up my mind to look directly at this thing and inform my own opinion. And then, the next thing I do is, as I start to encounter it more directly, I just get curious about, well, what is this thing and how does it work? How does it work in the world? Where can I use it? What is it good for? What do I like about it? What don't I like about it? So all these questions are geared to build a direct relationship with it, just myself, and hopefully stripping away the influence of these other influences. Essentially, I notice the same thing happens sometimes. Like I'll see, and I do this sometimes too. A teacher will offer something, and I'll hear a student say, "Well, that teacher doesn't have a good relationship, so I don't want to take their advice." And what I'm thinking is, what I try to do is just look at the content they're recommending. If the teacher's not good with relationships, but they're teaching math, for me, there's no relationship, so I can take it in directly. Now, if the teacher was coaching on relationships, I might be more skeptical, because there's a direct correlation there. But in any case, this is just one example of a pattern that in this case wasn't serving me very well. Now, I did say that patterns do have an upside. I do think that this pattern, like I said, has allowed me to learn ways of saying no or rejecting something, which can be useful. A lot of times people don't have a comfortable way of saying no to something. I also think it brought up skepticism for me at times, and I think sometimes being skeptical is great, because it can make you, if it's blind skepticism, not so great, but if it invites kind of a rigorousness of thinking, that I think is very, very powerful. And I'll finish up by offering a quote that I heard from this NLP trainer, Steve Andreas, and he said that maturity is doing something even when your parents recommend it. And I found that very amusing, because that was a good example of what I was talking about. I mean, I wouldn't reject things my parents said outright, but certainly you can acquire a habit of rejecting things too easily, especially as a teenager with your parents. And unfortunately, many of us are still teenagers as adults. So that quote helped snap me out of that. And when I would get a recommendation from my parents or from an authority, it would again remind me to think of ways to make it my own and form my own opinion about it.